Galw'r aelodau I drefn yr eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni'r prynawn yma yw'r cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog, ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf gan Hefin David.
Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government funding for major infrastructure projects?
Yes, the Wales Infrastructure Investment Plan sets out plans to invest over £6.5 billion in infrastructure across Wales over the remainder of the current Assembly term. That includes our flagship infrastructure projects such as investment in 20,000 affordable homes and the South Wales Metro.
Thank you, First Minister. In spring 2017, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance announced the Welsh Government's intention to undertake 3 major infrastructure schemes using the mutual investment model for this year. And according to the Welsh Government information, they've combined capital value, those 3 projects, of £1 billion. The Welsh Government stated that the mutual investment model, or MIM, will see private partners build and maintain public assets. In return, Welsh Government will pay a fee to the private partner, which will cover the cost of construction, maintenance and financing the project. And at the end of the project, it will be transferred into public ownership. So can I ask the First Minister, would he outline the key differences between MIM and PFI and identify whether other schemes will be used using the MIM model in the future during this Assembly term?
Well, the difference is that MIM has value for money among its core objectives. It won't be used to finance soft services, such as cleaning and catering, which led to expensive and inflexible contracts in the historic PFI model, nor will it be used to finance capital equipment. We'll invest a small amount of risk capital in each scheme, ensuring that the public sector participates in any return on investment. So it's a different model to PFI. I can say that a public interest director will be appointed by government to manage the public shareholdings and to promote the public interest more widely, and that post will ensure there's transparency about costs and the performance of private partners.
Nick Ramsey.
First Minister, broadband is a key part of our economic infrastructure within Wales. The UK Government has established the local full fibre Network Challenge Fund in order to bring on the next generation of digital infrastructure and to help local-led projects leverage commercial investment into the full fibre future, the gold standard of reliability in broadband. Will you join me in welcoming the news that Monmouthshire and neighbouring local authorities, Torfaen, Newport, as part of the City region, have successfully bid in to this scheme? And can you tell us how the Welsh Government's own plans for developing broadband infrastructure in Wales will dovetail into the success of areas like Monmouthshire, Torfaen and South East Wales to make sure that we capitalise on this? These are the first areas of the UK to benefit from this new development. How is the Welsh Government going to make the most of it?
Well, we are involved as a government with the projects that he has mentioned, and it builds, of course, on Superfast Cymru, which has been hugely successful in bringing broadband to many communities that would otherwise not be served with broadband if it was left to the market because of their size. So we look to work with the UK Government to deliver the best digital outcomes for all our communities.
Adam Price.
Given the current level of interest rates and annuity rates, a debt service liability of about 150 million over the course of 30 years would unlock about 2.5 billion using the kind of innovative financing method like the MIM that the First Minister referred to. Do you think that represents value for money? And if it does, shouldn't we be much more ambitious in terms of the scale of the capital investment programme to maximise this historic opportunity of low interest rates?
I'm with him on ambition, but it has to be tempered, of course, with prudence. So I can say, of course, that the MIM incorporates the best of the Scottish non-distributing model, optimum risk allocation, whole life costing and performance-related rate-based payments, whilst ensuring that new investment is classified to the private sector. Hugely important issue, of course, we have to deal with in this chamber on many times, and it's therefore genuinely additional to investment from other public services. So it's a different model from PFI. We will always seek to maximise the amount of funds available through the scheme, but of course we also have to bear in mind the affordability of our ambition for Wales.
Question 2, Jane Bryant.
What plans does the Welsh Government have to support technology companies in South East Wales?
Our Economic Action Plan recognises the importance of technology to future-proof and maintain the competitiveness of our economy. Our calls for action, with their focus on digitalisation, automation and innovation, will see us foster the conditions that will enable technology businesses across Wales to thrive.
Thank you, First Minister. On Friday, I visited Innovation Point, a digital innovation company based in Newport that helps provide expertise, knowledge and contacts to small tech firms. Their annual International Digital Festival is the biggest tech event in Wales. Innovation Point has attracted many companies to Wales. Work by businesses like these are vital in sustaining growth and establishing our reputation for being at the forefront of technological developments. So will the First Minister set out the steps the Welsh Government is taking to assist small and medium-sized technology firms in Newport and the region so that we can seize the opportunities to attract more investment and ensure South East Wales maintains its place as a digital hub?
Well, first of all, of course, the Cardiff Capital Region deal will help to deliver more funding for digital businesses. We provided £25 million of the funding to the Institute for Compound Semiconductor Technology in Cardiff, with a further £38 million investment with the Cardiff Capital Region. And, of course, the UK's first National Software Academy, a new National Cyber Security Academy, and, of course, as the member said, Innovation Point. In 2017, we announced we would invest £100 million in the Tech Valleys programme over 10 years to support the creation of more than 1,500 jobs. And indeed, 2 months ago in May, the Cabinet Secretary confirmed we would invest an extra £25 million in the Tech Valleys programme over the next 3 years as part of that commitment.
Mohammed Ashka.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I recently visited the Alacrity Foundation in Newport, which is an educational charity with a mission to train and mentor graduates to create next generation of high-tech companies based in Wales, by providing the skills and knowledge required to run a profitable technology startup. It also supports businesses by challenging its graduates to solve practical problem sources directly from companies themselves. Will the First Minister join me in congratulating Dr. Will Williams and his team and the private benefactors who help fund this charity alongside the Welsh Government for the fantastic work they are doing in training the next generation of entrepreneurs with the skills required to run the companies that will provide the jobs we need in the future in Wales? Thank you.
Yes, I would join him in that. I think it's hugely important that advice is given to individuals who have great ideas but who need advice as to how to run a business, how to be entrepreneurs, and to be able to receive that advice is invaluable to them.
Cwestiwn yn awr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau. Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, can you tell us which areas of Wales have the highest rates of late-stage cancer diagnosis?
Well, I mean, that's something that I would have to write to the member about, but we do know that as far as the targets are concerned, in Wales our figures compare very well.
Rich or poor, rural or urban, man or woman, cancer is an indiscriminate disease, yet diagnosis is anything but. Recent research by Macmillan shows that cancer diagnosis in this country remains a postcode lottery, and our poorest communities consistently face later stage diagnosis. Where stage is recorded, more than 1 in 4 people in Wales were diagnosed with cancer at its latest stage, which is stage 4. This is not only unacceptable in the context of our rates being the worst of any country in the UK, it's not acceptable full stop. For some cancers, the wait between first suspecting that something is wrong and diagnosis is the longest in Europe. We all know that catching cancer early saves lives. First Minister, you can save lives. Will you commit to setting and sticking to a 28-day cancer diagnosis target for all so that we can catch cancer early?
Well, what medics tell me is that it can't be done for all types of cancer, that sometimes it takes longer for certain cancers to be diagnosed. Now, she makes the point that it's hugely important, for example, for people to be encouraged to present early, and also, of course, for GPs to refer people early on in the pathway. We know the vast majority of cancer patients in Wales start their treatment within target times. We know that the incidence of cancer continues to rise and treatment is increasing in complexity. The number of referrals for suspected cancer requiring investigation has risen by more than 36,000 over a 5-year period to around 96,000 referrals a year, which I think is at least partial good news, because it means people are being referred on more quickly. We know, of course, that 85.5% of patients newly diagnosed with cancer via the urgent suspected cancer route started definitive treatment within the target time of 62 days, and 97% of those diagnosed not via the urgent route started definitive treatment within the target time of 31 days.
So you're talking about treatment, and I'm asking you about diagnosis. Cancer Research UK has championed it, clinicians are calling for it, England is doing it, and yet, First Minister, you continue to argue with the experts. You reject 28-day targets, not for the good of patients, but for the good of your own public relations. You won't hit those targets, and you won't meet those patients' needs. First Minister, the evidence is clear. People in poorer areas are diagnosed later. Macmillan's data shows stage 4 diagnosis in our poorest areas is up to 9% higher compared to their wealthier neighbours. You can't afford to be poor and ill in Labour's Wales. An information campaign, more readily access to GPs and diagnosis services could turn this around. So will you commit to creating accessible cancer diagnosis services in all parts of Wales, so that whether you are rich or poor, your cancer diagnosis is not left too late?
Well, I mean, as somebody who is married to somebody who works for Macmillan, I'm lobbied on a daily basis in terms of the way cancer is dealt with in Wales. And I can say there is no clinical evidence at all to suggest that a 28-day target would work. Where's that come from? Where is the clinical evidence to say that 28 days is some kind of golden figure? Politicians love these figures, but in reality, I don't see any clinical evidence for it. There are the issues. Well, there's no point shouting. If you ask the question, I'll answer the question for you now. Part of the problem is a reluctance in some areas for people to come forward early, and that doesn't help. We need to make sure that all GPs are referring as quickly as possible, because access to treatment is the same for everyone. It's simply a question of encouraging people to come forward as early as possible and for GPs to refer as quickly as possible. And that is something that is hugely important in terms of the campaigns that we have run, in terms of raising awareness of different types of cancer, because we know if people are asked to check their symptoms, they are more likely to present early. And that's the way to make sure that more people, not just are cured of cancer, but they live with cancer, making sure that people are aware of the different types of cancers and their symptoms. And the work that Macmillan does is exactly that. Part of their work is to raise awareness of different cancers, provide evidence to people. They will be at the Royal Welsh Show. One of the themes they've had at the Royal Welsh Show is they have dealt with skin cancer, melanoma especially, with the show that's held in the summer, and they focus very, very strongly on people identifying cancer at an early stage themselves, or what may be the symptoms of cancer, so they can present, so then, of course, they can have a better outcome.
Rhan yr wrthblaid, Paul Davies.
First Minister, the report published by independent examiner Donna Ockenden last week provided a frightening picture of the delivery of services in North Wales. The damning report showed that leadership at the Health Board has been wholly inappropriate and significantly flawed since its creation, and that mental health services are chronically understaffed at a time when patient numbers and acuity was increasing. First Minister, are you ashamed of your government's management of Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board?
Well, there will be a statement on this further on the agenda this afternoon. What I can say is, of course, this is a difficult report. The report did highlight areas of progress in the presentation of the board last week. BCU now has a different executive leadership team in place. Since 2016, a new chief executive, 7 executives, including a medical director and director of nursing, and a new director of mental health have been appointed to lead on the improvements needed. A new chair will take up post shortly. I know that the Cabinet Secretary has published a written statement. He will, as I say, make an oral statement on the review later this afternoon, and he has been clear what he expects of the board.
First Minister, you should be ashamed the way that you've actually run this health board. It'll be 3 years ago this summer that the Welsh Government put Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board in special measures, and the Ockenden report has shown that over that period, progress has been slow and significant improvements have yet to be made. Lessons simply haven't been learnt, and people in North North Wales will rightly feel anger and outrage at the lack of progress of the past 3 years in addressing these serious failings. This is a health board that is only 8 years old and has been in special measures for 3 of those years. It's your government's responsibility to run this health board. You are responsible. Your Cabinet Secretary is accountable to you for the delivery of health services in Wales. What are you doing to make sure that he sorts this mess out? And how are you performance managing the Health Secretary to make sure he improves Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board? You clearly have no targets for improving the Health Board. Have you set any targets for your Health Secretary?
Well, I can say that Donna Ockenden was commissioned by BCU in 2015 to review the governance arrangements relating to the care of patients in Betsy Cadwaladr. She presented her findings to the board on the 12th of July. The report runs to over 500 pages, with the executive summary alone running to 50 pages. I wonder if he's read that report. The findings are consistent with previous reports, in many cases a summary of previous reviews since 2009. Now, what's hugely important, now that we have that report, we can now build on that report, as the Cabinet Secretary will outline this afternoon, and now that we know what the challenges are, meet those challenges.
Well, clearly your Cabinet Secretary has failed when it comes to Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board. The Welsh Government's record of delivering health services in North Wales speaks for itself. Let me give you some examples, First Minister. 93-year-old Margaret Megan Evans waited on a concrete path for more than 3 hours after falling and breaking her hip, and then was not seen by an emergency department doctor until almost 11 hours after help was initially summoned. 46-year-old Esther Wood waited 5 hours in an ambulance before being admitted to hospital, where she then died. 78-year-old Neville Welton passed away following a delay in treatment because of capacity, staffing, administration errors and patient flow problems. First Minister, these are real people. Yes. Warnings that lives remain at risk have been issued by the Coroner's Office following deaths in hospitals, and in the past 12 months, the Health Board received 294 new claims for either personal injury or clinical or medical negligence. There's clearly a culture of deny, defend and dismiss at the heart of Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board and your government. First Minister, when will your government take responsibility for the catalogue of failures in care at Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board since it has been in special measures? And will you now apologise to the people of North Wales for the shambles of a system that your government has presided over and for the lack of accountability in handling these services?
Well, this contrast, doesn't it, with the way his party approaches things in England, where if there is an issue like Gosford, it's always the fault. It's always the fault. I know it's a leadership contest, but he'd like to answer the question.
Please. Allow the First Minister to respond.
Yes. When all these things are brushed off towards the health boards, it's never the fault of the UK government. We take responsibility for what happens. Let's hear you then. We take responsibility for what happens in Betsy Cadwaladr because it is in special measures, and it is the report that we will use in order to create that improvement. We are diverting and putting resources into health as best we can, despite the austerity. Well, they can moan about it, despite the austerity that has been put in place by his party. If he stood up and demanded the same for Wales as his party has given to Northern Ireland, he would have more credibility in the arguments that he puts forward. As I say, the Cabinet Secretary will make a statement on this afternoon. It's time he and his party apologise for fleecing the people of Wales over the past 8 years.
Arweinydd Grŵp UKIP, Caroline Jones.
First Minister, the outgoing Auditor General for Wales has been highly critical.
Allow Caroline Jones to ask the question. Caroline Jones.
Diolch, First Minister, the outgoing Auditor General for Wales has been highly critical of the Welsh public sector's inability to adapt to reduced budgets. In evidence to the Public Accounts Committee, Hugh Vaughan-Thomas said that the public services could be reforming for the better, but their only response to austerity has been cutting costs. He also said that he was frustrated that devolution hasn't led to a fundamental rethink on how we deliver public services in Wales. The reality is that regardless of whomever is in power in Westminster, we will not see massive increases in public spending, because the UK is now nearly £2 trillion in debt, which equates to around 85% of GDP. We can't borrow our way out of this mess, so we have to spend smarter. So, First Minister, do you agree with the outgoing Auditor General that we need a radical rethink for public services?
Well, we always look to put in place the best system for public services that we can. For example, we took 3 Welsh Government-sponsored bodies, turned them into 1 NRW. We reduced the number of bodies delivering health to make sure that there were fewer organisations that people had to be in contact with. But the reality is this: we have protected the Welsh Public Services budget. Local government in Wales is far better financed than is the case in England. We haven't seen the destruction of social services that is happening under a Tory government in England. We have put resources into social care and also into health. We've also, of course, put resources into education. We have seen the cut in education funding that we saw in England last week, where schools have been starved of money by a Conservative government. Why is this relevant? Because if they were in charge, they would do exactly the same in Wales. Exactly the same in Wales. We have fought against the austerity that the Welsh Conservatives have greeted in Wales, and we know what would happen to our old people, to our young people, to schools, to hospitals, to social services, if ever, God forbid, they got their hands on power.
I agree with the former Auditor General that austerity is the biggest challenge facing public services in Wales, coupled with the rise in demand. These services are facing incredible pressure. While NHS spending has continued to rise, local authority cuts are impacting upon social care, which in turn impacts upon healthcare. We spend more per head on health than they do in England, yet we have to wait longer for appointments and longer for treatment. So, First Minister, your government's long-term plan for health and social care will help us prepare for future challenges. But what about now? How do we meet the challenges of today? Hugh Vaughan-Thomas said that public services in Wales need to think more radically about how services are delivered, with a focus on outcomes rather than structures. So, First Minister, is your government too focused on structures as opposed to outcomes?
No, because, for example, in the field of health, that would mean we were looking at yet another reorganisation. That's not something that would be that would cause stability in the health service. It is down to resource. It's down to ensuring that we can allocate as much resources as we can to health and other public services, but it's a hugely difficult task against the backdrop of austerity that we face and what we faced over the past 8 years.
Thank you, First Minister. Hugh Vaughan-Thomas said that the Williams Commission report clearly sets out the nature of systemic problems that need to be fixed. He added that he finds himself both frustrated and increasingly concerned that many clarion calls for action that Wales has heard over the last decade or so have not yet generated the tangible changes that are now urgently needed, and that we have not used devolution as an opportunity for fundamental rethinks. So, First Minister, does your government lack the will to do what is necessary to drive forward change in Wales public services, or do you truly believe that the changes proposed by the Williams Commission and others are unnecessary? Thank you.
I'm not sure whether it's now UKIP policy to back what was in the Williams Commission in terms of local government reform. If that is the case, that's interesting. But we have seen a situation in Wales where we have seen a development of consortia, for example, in education, which has led to far better outcomes for education than was previously the case. At one point, we had 6 local authorities in special measures. We had 1 local authority that collapsed completely in Anglesey. We're far from that position. So we've worked to make sure that our local authorities have become more sustainable. There are still challenges to make sure that happens in the future. And that is where, of course, it'd be interesting to hear other parties' views in terms of what the structure of public services should be in the future, rather than simply saying, well, we don't like this. But what are the views of other parties? And let's see if there is a consensus. We've had the parliamentary review on health, but a consensus in terms of how public services might be structured in the future.
Question 3, Neil McAvoy.
Will the First Minister make a statement on traffic congestion, on tackling traffic congestion in South Wales Central?
Well, the Metro obviously is one obvious example of how that is being done. We also have our pinch points programme, the improvements to public transport I've already mentioned, and supporting local authorities to address key local issues.
First Minister, we all know that you are making traffic congestion worse in Cardiff rather than tackling it. Thousands of houses are being thrown up right now along Llantrisant Road, for example, in the west of the city, where there's only a single carriage road. The Metro is at some point in the future. You're also planning on building a motorway when you can make a decision, but that traffic will then end up in local roads. Now, in this region, in the city, especially in the west, along Llantrisant Road, traffic jams already go on for miles. Now, there is no metro in place, there is no public transport in place, there's no actual plan when you speak to developers. So my question is, what are constituents meant to do? And what advice do you have to those people stuck for hours and hours and hours in jams? And I would appreciate this time if you could just take just that little bit of care and actually address the question, what are my constituents supposed to do?
Well, I expect, first of all, the issue of development is a matter for Cardiff Council, not for the Welsh Government. Secondly, we do expect councils to put in place plans for sustainable transport, and particularly for active travel. And I note the intention of Cardiff Council, for example, to look at 5 cycling superhighways, which I think is an excellent idea for the city. He is right to say that we cannot keep on building houses without there being an active transport plan that supports those developments. We can't rely on the roads in Cardiff forever and a day to take the traffic. But these are matters that have to be addressed in the course of the planning process.
Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Congestion straddles the whole of South Wales Central. Just a distance from this chamber, the village of Dinas Powys exists, the largest village in Wales. On the one side of it, Barry, the largest town in Wales, and the capital city falls the other side of it. For some 40 years, there's been a campaign to have a bypass built around the village of Dinas Powys, and successive campaigns sadly have come to nothing. Do you identify with the issues around congestion in the village of Dinas Powys, the blight it puts on people's lives there, especially with air pollution and noise in particular, where that road passes several schools, primary schools, I might add? And will you identify this as a top priority for the Welsh Government and work with the Vale of Glamorgan Council to take forward the plans that are currently being discussed?
Well, this is primarily a matter, of course, of the Vale of Glamorgan Council, but we did award funding of 20,000 in 2016 to 17 and 80,000 in 2017 to 18 to the Council towards a study looking at the options to resolve traffic congestion in Dinas Powys. The scope of that work was extended in April 2018. I understand the Vale of Glamorgan Council is funding additional work, and then consultation on the next stage is planned for this September 2018.
Julie Morgan.
Would the First Minister agree that the Metro plans for 2 new stations in my constituency of Cardiff North, Gabalfa Llandaff North, one of them, and the other one to go in the centre of the new build of the Velindre Cancer Centre, that these will aid traffic congestion in the city of Cardiff?
Yes, I do. I think it's hugely important. There is no way that Cardiff city centre can plan its way out of traffic congestion simply by roads. That's self-evident. Which is why, of course, we're making the investment in the Metro. And what's important about the Metro is its extendability, that in the future new stations can be opened up with light rail to provide better alternatives than people have at the moment in terms of public transport, whether it's light rail, whether it's buses, whether it's heavy rail, and, of course, the need to make it easier for people to cycle. There's no doubt in my mind that a substantial proportion of cyclists, apart from the dedicated few, who I know some in this chamber, don't feel comfortable about sharing the road with heavy vehicles. And so anything that can be done to make it easier for people to cycle to work via separate highways for cycles, I think is something to be welcomed.
Question 4, Jane Hutt.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's review of gender equality?
Yes, my ambition is for the review to provide the change needed for Wales to become a world leader in women's rights and gender equality. I know the Leader of the House recently updated members on the first phase of the review, and phase 2 will provide a comprehensive programme of actions to take forward.
Thank you, First Minister. Last week we held the first meeting of the Cross-Party Group on Women, supported by the Women's Equality Network, a membership network of over 1,000 organisations and individuals working to advance the rights of women in all spheres of Welsh life. The Women's Equality Network delegation is presenting their UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women report to the UN Committee this week, asking a wide range of questions of the UK and Welsh governments regarding gender equality. Will you agree to meet with the delegation to respond to their report, which includes calling on the Welsh Government to formally adopt the Istanbul Convention and CEDAW principles to provide internationally recognised standards to make Wales the safest place in Europe to be a woman?
Yes, I would be open to meet with the delegation to discuss the report. We will, of course, formally respond to the report during the UN examination on the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in February of next year. Could I suggest as well, of course, the Leader of the House and the National Advisers who recently attended Cabinet are also involved in any meeting with the delegation.
Jonathan Saunders.
First Minister, your own intentions towards honing a government of equals is sadly undermined by figures which make clear that the Welsh Government's gender pay gap for your own staff has recently increased. The annual Employer Equality Report earlier this year found that the pay gap between men and women working in the Welsh Government had actually increased in 2017 from the previous year. On average, men actually earn more than women in every single pay grade, from team support to senior civil service. Men also outnumber women in each of the 3 highest pay grades. And the average basic full-time equivalent salary for men was more than £3,000 higher than for women. Given such a scale of inequity and unfairness within your own government departments, do you not now think that it is time to practice what you preach and to better seek to lead by example? In other words, First Minister, by getting your own house in order.
Well, the Welsh Government gender pay gap is 8%. It is nothing to shout about, of course, but it's better than the pay gap that exists in Whitehall, which is the 10%.
That is, you are
what on earth is wrong?
Carry on, First Minister.
What on earth is wrong with comparing the situation in Wales to the situation that is so shameful to the Conservatives in London?
Good job he's going.
The First Minister is answering the question, please.
If I could, well...
Please, will you allow the First Minister to continue his answer?
We do recognise the current position isn't good enough. It's fair to say the majority of higher paid roles are currently filled by men, and Welsh Government is fully committed to doing everything it can to reduce the pay gap. Women hold 40% of senior civil service posts in the Welsh Government. Now, of course, the pay arrangements for senior staff are not in the control of the Welsh Government. They're not devolved. But there is a commitment on our part to achieving 50-50 representation across the senior civil service by 2020. So what measures are being taken? Well, measures are being taken to attract more women into senior posts. This includes support for women who are pregnant or on maternity leave, ensuring job adverts are inclusive, offering development courses to women and having no all-male shortlists for recruitment exercises. Alongside this, the Welsh Government has signed up to Chwarae Teg's Fair Play Employer Benchmarking Service, and that will help to review existing practices and develop the action plan for further changes.
Cwestiwn 5, Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. A wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am ddyfodol Bwrdd Iechyd Prifysgol Betsi Cadwaladr.
Wel, ni wedi amlinellu disgwyliadau a cherig milltir clir ar gyfer Bwrdd Iechyd Prifysgol Betsi Cadwaladr mwyn ysgogi gwelliannau a gweithredu'r angymhellion a wnaed mewn adroddiadau allweddol yn ystod 19 mis nesaf. Mae cadeirydd newydd wedi benodi ac mae cymorth mwy dwys yn cael ei roi i gyflymu'r gwelliannau bydd poblogaeth y gogledd.
A dyma'r un ateb dwi wedi bod yn gael ers 5 mlynedd ofyn yr un cwestiwn i bob pwrpas, ac i ni wedi clywed cyfeiriad at adroddiad daniol arall sydd wedi cael ei gyhoeddi nawr yn ddiweddar. Mae wrth gwrs yn anghenfil o Fwrdd Iechyd yn diwedd, corff cyhoeddus mwyaf, sicr y Bwrdd Iechyd mwyaf sydd ganddo ni yng Nghymru. Ond dros y 2 mlynedd diwetha, mae wedi bod mewn mesur arbennig, ac felly mae wedi bod yn uniongyrchol atebol i'ch llywodraeth chi, yn uniongyrchol o dan arolygaeth eich ysgrifennydd Cabinet Iechyd chi, ac felly mae'r byc yn stopo yn uniongyrchol gyda'ch llywodraeth chi. Allwch chi ddim gwadu hynny, ond gwedwch wrthon ni, faint o rhagor o adroddiadau damniol a faint o rhagor o sgandalau sydd ei angen cyn i chi dderbyn bod y sefyllfa fel y gyma hi yn anghynaladwy a bod hi'n amser am newid ac bod yn rhaid edrych eto nawr ar strwythurau dilifro gwasanaethau iechyd yng Ngogledd Cymru.
Dwi ddim gofod yn newid strwythur yn ei gwaniaeth. Beth sy'n mynd i ei gwaniaeth yw cael adroddiadau sicrhau bod na weithredu ar yr adroddiadau hynny. Sef ddim yn digwydd ar ôl yr adroddiad, wel bydd y byniadaeth yn eitha teg yn fy marn i, a mae'n holl bwysig bod ni'n deall beth yw'r heriau cyn wrth gwrs cyrraedd yr heriau hynny. Beth sy'n digwydd sy'n bositif yn beth sy'n cadwaladau mae strategaeth iechyd meddwl wedi cael ei datblygu gyda partneriaid a hefyd defnyddwyr gwasanaeth. Mae yna mwy o ffocws ynglyn ag ansawdd a phrofiad cleifion. Ni wedi gweld wrth gwrs gwasanaethau mamolaeth yn gwella a wedi dod mas wrth gwrs o fesurau arbennig. Ni wedi gweld gwellhad sylweddol ynglyn â rhywna sydd yn gorffen i hyfforddi. Ni'n gwybod bod gwasanaethau therapi yn gweithredu mynediad fewn target o 14 wythnos. So mae yna bethau wedi gwella, ond mi'n wir i weid wrth gwrs bod yna waith i wneud to. Mae'n holl bwysig gyda ni adroddiadau fel Ockenden mwyn dangos beth sydd eisiau wneud yn y pen draw.
Darren Miller.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, you have to forgive me, but I think that was a very complacent answer. It's very clear from the Ockenden report that the issues which were identified when the Health Board was put into special measures are not being addressed. And I quote from one of the reasons that the Health Board was being put into special measures. The Health Board must implement governance and assurance actions which have been highlighted in a series of reports, including the Wales Audit Office and Healthcare Inspectorate Wales and a review carried out by Anne Lloyd. The Donna Ockenden report makes it absolutely clear that those things have not been fully implemented, and yet the man who's responsible for the oversight and accountability arrangements of these special measures, who sat on your front row in your cabinet, around that cabinet table, who is responsible for the failure, is still in his post. Don't you agree with me that there needs to be an apology from the Cabinet Secretary to the people of North Wales and to the families of the Towel Van patients who were failed by your government in terms of turning this situation around? And will you accept that, given that we don't have any confidence in your Health Secretary to turn the situation around, that he ought to go, and go now?
Oh dear, is he standing for the leadership as well? I mean, really? We have a report that was published last week. We've not had a chance to respond to it yet. And according to the Conservative Party, these responses can come within a few days. It's a 500-page report. I wonder if they actually read the report. There are 50 pages of an executive summary, and it is right to say that the Cabinet Secretary will need to respond to that report, which he will do this afternoon. This is all about improving patient experience, not about scoring political points.
Michelle Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, what lessons have you learned over the years since the creation of the Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board?
Well, because we know that there were enormous problems in the Health Board. Those problems are not yet resolved, and that has to be accepted. There has been some progress, but its reports, such as Ockenden, provide us with the ability to identify the challenges more closely and ensure the Health Board then meets those challenges.
Cwestiwn 629.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. Am wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am y ddarpariaeth o ofal cartref gyda'r nos.
Awdurdod lleol sy'n gyfrifol am asesu anghenion gofal a chymorth unigolion, gan gynnwys unrhyw ofal cartref yn ystod y nos sydd ei angen ac yn fynd ati i ddiwallu'r anghenion hynny drwy gynllun gofal a chymorth.
Diolch yn fawr am yr ateb yna. Now, Age Cymru have carried out some important work in analysing the provision, or rather the lack of provision, of nighttime domiciliary care in Wales. Unfortunately, only 8 out of the 22 local authorities actually provided figures in terms of the number of adults receiving nighttime domiciliary care. Of those local authorities that could provide figures, we know that only 1.92% of care and support assessments led to nighttime domiciliary care. Under 2% of assessments led to nighttime domiciliary care, with wide variations between local authorities. So, what, therefore, is your government going to do to tackle the lack of data collection in the first place, and more importantly, the lack of consistency and provision in terms of nighttime support to our most vulnerable citizens?
Well, we've already taken action to improve the terms and conditions of the workforce. We provided £19 million of recurrent funding to local authorities for them to work with providers to further support the workforce. We're aware that a number of authorities use part of that funding to pay a higher rate for sleep-in cover. We will, of course, continue to work using, for example, the Social Services and Wellbeing Act with the local authorities in order to make sure the local authorities understand their duties and to create greater consistency. It's very difficult, of course, to understand on an individual basis whether somebody has been assessed or not for nighttime domiciliary care. But it's hugely important that local authorities are flexible enough in their interpretation of the regulations and their assessments to make sure that people get the care that they need.
Susie Dibbs.
Diolch, Llywydd. Well, I think those figures just highlight the critical role of unpaid carers in overnight care for people within their family, usually. Obviously, in those circumstances, it's very often mental health care, and a traditional domiciliary care is not appropriate anyway. You'll remember that the Welsh Conservatives launched a policy last month to give grants to young adult carers to help them stay in education post-16, partly on the basis that it needed to be recognised that carers' allowance should be payable to those individuals, taking into account their overnight caring responsibilities as part of their hours for eligibility. Can you give us some steer on whether this policy is going to be considered by the advisory body that's supporting the Minister, who's at the moment trying to get together some policies to support carers?
Well, there's nothing that is not on the table as far as future policies are concerned. There is the question, of course, of identifying the resources in order to do that. But also we do have the education maintenance allowance in Wales, which I suspect would apply to potentially to many carers. But of course, if there are other proposals that come forward, we will of course look at them.
Question 7, Joyce Watson.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the accessibility of children's play areas?
Well, all children benefit from being outside, interacting with their environment and developing through play. Statutory guidance directs local authorities working with partners to consider the diverse needs of all children and young people in their area.
Thank you, First Minister, but I'm sure that anyone would be moved by the story that broke last week of an 8-year-old boy, Kobe Barrow, who helped design a park which could be used by both able-bodied and disabled children. And he did that in memory of his best friend, Rihanna, who sadly passed away in 2016. It emerged that Rihanna had to travel for 3 hours from her home to play in a playground that had suitable equipment. And he wanted to rectify that for the other children who lived more locally. First Minister, what steps are the Welsh Government taking to ensure that playgrounds in Wales have inclusive play equipment for children, and how are we going to monitor progress of that throughout Wales?
Well, the statutory guidance directs local authorities to consider the diverse needs of all children and young people in their area, including those with disabilities. I know that in April, the Minister for Children, Older People and Social Care visited Oakland's play area in RCT, which is a good example of an accessible play area. It shows what can be achieved. In May, local authorities were reminded of the expectation for each local authority to develop a clearly identified play section on their websites. That information should be made available in a way that supports children and families to know what's available in their local areas. It should also include actions that local authorities propose to take to achieve sufficiency and improve inclusive play opportunities. I can also say that the Groundwork Wales Snap Cymru Sustainable Play project trained play workers in disability awareness and inclusion, and that was extremely successful in engaging disabled people in outdoor play.
Angela Burns.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, of course, you hit on the word play, and you said that everybody should have access to be able to play, especially young children. We talk in this place a lot about obesity, about making our kids healthy and fit and active and all the rest of it. And yet, First Minister, what I'd be interested to know is what is your government doing, your government, the one here in Wales, doing to ensure that the planning system in Wales takes due regard of the necessity to have safe, accessible play areas close to homes that are currently being built. Because too many times you get to a situation where the developer will actually perhaps do through the use of a 106 agreement or something, will put aside an area for a play area, but it happens to be the other side of a busy main road, or it happens to be the other side of the village where kids can't access it. In the old days, we used to put our play areas near our houses so that the parent at home or the carer could look out and just check the kid was still safe and out there playing. We can't do this now, and I've seen planners use the pavement, the green grass by the sides of pavements, as part of the square footage to add to the so-called playing area available in a housing development. How can we stop that? How can we make safe play areas that small kids can access all the time, where people can watch them and know that they are truly, truly protected?
Well, an effective planning authority will do just that. I've seen it happen in my own authority, where play areas are accessible on new housing estates, and very accessible. There's no reason why that can't be emulated by authorities elsewhere, through the use of Section 106 agreements and through the use of planners ensuring that play areas are available for new residents on new development. So there is a responsibility on local authorities and their planners to make sure that they follow the best practice that I've seen elsewhere in Wales.
Question 8, Lee Waters.
What plans do the Welsh Government have to introduce a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in urban areas?
We have carried out a comprehensive review of speed limits near schools on or near trunk roads, and we have a multi-year programme to introduce part-time 20-mile-per-hour limits in those locations. We also provide funding for local authorities to implement 20-mile-per-hour zones and limits through the Road Safety and Safe Routes in Communities grants. We have also commissioned Dr Adrian Davis to carry out an evidence review on the 20-mile-an-hour limits to inform any future policy development. That review will be concluded in August, and that will show us what the direction forward will be.
Thank you, First Minister. Because 2 years ago, Public Health Wales did produce some research which showed that the default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit would result in a reduction in road traffic casualties, a reduction in carbon and nitrogen oxide emissions in residential areas, a decrease in noise, an increase in active travel, community cohesion and more spending in local shops. Put simply, it would achieve all the national goals set out in the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Now, having said that we'd introduced 20-mile-an-hour zones once we had the powers, now we have the powers, it does seem that we are waiting for the Department of Transport in London to complete some further research before we go ahead. But wouldn't the First Minister agree that the evidence is clear and consistent, and we should now get on with it?
Well, I mean, let's wait to see what the review says. We're not dependent on what the DFT does, for obvious reasons. What their work is of interest to us, of course, but we have our own review. Once that's published, then, of course, further decisions can be taken as to then whether or not we introduce a comprehensive 20-mile-an-hour limit.
David Melding.
First Minister, this has been examined, reviewed endlessly across Europe, and very many countries now have a 20-mile-an-hour limit, or 30 kilometres in their measures. Can I commend Cardiff Council for just getting on with this? And I welcome the local campaigns that are now pushing us, like the one in Surrey. It should be default, and the motorist should not be king in terms of who can go out and enjoy the outside environment. When we drive cars, we have to be responsible for that, and the pedestrian needs greater protection, and we need to shift to more active forms of travel.
It's impossible to argue with him when he puts it that way. And he is right to say that active consideration will be given to a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. He's also right to say that we want to encourage more people to other forms of transport, and that's precisely, as I've outlined earlier on this afternoon, what we're looking to do.
Simon Thomas.
Wel, dyma trydydd plaid yn codi I gefnogi 20 milltir yr awr fel y peth naturiol yn ein trefi a pentrefi ni. Pan oedden ni'n mynd i'r ysgol gynradd, oedd 90% o blant yn cerdded nôl ymlaen i'r ysgol gynradd ar ei ben ei hunan. Erbyn hyn, dim ond 50% sy'n teithio ar ben ei hunan nôl ymlaen i ysgol gynradd. Mae hwnna oherwydd bod y car wedi dod i domenyddu y tirwedd trefol ni. Mewn ffordd sydd ddim yn naturiol, sydd ddim yn caniatáu chwarae naturiol, sydd ddim yn caniatáu iechyd naturiol chwaith. Felly o leia, newch chi roi grym I awdurdodau lleol nawr I cyflwyno'r y parthau hyn heb unrhyw fwystyr gan Llywodraeth Cymru.
Wel, ni yn rhoi arian I awdurdodau lleol mwyn sicrhau bod na parthoedd 20 milltir yr awr yn barod, a mae bod yn gweld nhw ar draws Cymru. Nid problem cyfreithiol yw ond ariannol. Maen nhw'n gwybod bod yr arian ar gael, dyna pam wrth gwrs mae'n grant ar gael mwyn sicrhau bod y parthau gallu symud ymlaen.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw